We can't forget history. It's so important to what our country has been through. There's a divine presence in the formation of this country. And through organizations, through Farm Bureau, we follow that same guidelines to protect all of our interest in agriculture.
We like more freedom and less controls from the government or other entities, so our ag policy push always through Farm Bureau has been to keep it free as much as possible.
And that idea that freedom is just a vessel for responsibility, it basically says that every time we want more freedom or that we ask for more freedom, it has to be matched with taking responsibility for that freedom. Hank Wilson was a wheat farmer, a cattle rancher, and a horse breeder from Wilsall. He was elected State Farm Bureau president in 1961. Now, when I shared stories about Hank Wilson with Farm Bureau members today, those that remembered Hank Wilson from this era remembered that he bred fast horses. And I saw a lot of that reflected in his personality and in his leadership. Hank Wilson seemed to take a slightly different approach than some leaders from past eras of Farm Bureau. He was clearly focused on making immediate change and taking responsibility for the change that they wanted to see. In the 1960s, the Kennedy administration proposed a new farm program, and it continued to further restrict allotment acres, marketing quotas, and increase penalties for growing beyond the allotment. So in this federal farm program, the federal government was trying to restrict the amount of grain that American farmers were growing by telling farmers that they could only be allotted to grow so much. And when I studied this era of agricultural policy history, it seemed as though the intent behind these policies was to avoid the glut of overproduction that had caused such chaos in the markets following World War I. And so the federal government was still trying to rein in overproduction, if you will, or as they saw it. So federal farm programs in the 1960s further restricted those acreage allotments. Meanwhile, most farmers were in favor of fewer government programs and less government intervention in farming. So that's what they said they believed, but something wasn't quite adding up in this era, because farmers did have a chance to condone this system of acreage allotments and marketing quotas, and that was done through the annual wheat referendum.
If we abstract from the political turmoil involving the Vietnam War, much of the U.S. was enjoying quite a bit of prosperity coming out of World War II and then entering the 60s and the 70s. Agriculture, however, had lower per capita incomes than their urban counterparts. We really had fairly low prices. In fact, prices for wheat were not much higher than they really were in the Depression. The wheat referendum was essentially a two-pronged attempt to increase wheat prices. And the idea was to try and reduce the amount of wheat produced in an effort to increase the price of that wheat. So there were 13 referendums between 1941 and 1963, and they all passed by the needed 2/3 majority of the farmers who voted. On the other hand, the 1963 wheat referendum was not passed, and Montana was initially voting for the referendums, and then Montana producers later on decided not to vote for that, at least not for the 2/3 majority that was needed. In general, most people understand that such actions often have unintended consequences, and certainly agricultural programs are evidence of these. Subsidies might increase prices of the product being subsidized, but it's often quite rational for someone to be against subsidies for all other goods and services, but be in favor of subsidizing their own. It makes perfect sense.
In the early 1960s, a Glacier County Farm Bureau member, his name was Hjart Hjartarson. His friends called him Babe, and he also served on the State Farm Bureau board at the time. He simply posed the question. He asked, do farmers really want a socialistic farm program, or are they trapped in a web of entanglement of government demands that seems hopeless to get out of? And indeed, his fellow Montana Farm Bureau members responded and said, you're right, this is not the system we want. We want freedom, freedom to grow what and how much we want to grow and to market it the way we want to market it. And we want to market it on a free market system in order to be paid and rewarded for what we grow. And if we want that freedom, we have to take responsibility to be the change that we want to see. And Farm Bureau members that year said that they would take that responsibility. They would defeat the wheat referendum.
I think the Farm Bureau exists to help the individual and give the individual a voice. And because the individuals want freedom, we're going to obviously pass our resolutions to help ensure that. And we're sending our lobbyists to Helena and Washington, D.C. to help us maintain that freedom. We're spending more and more time against policy that might impede our way of life than we are policy that gives us our way of life. We have our way of life and we like it and we want to protect that. And I think that coming together in a room of hundreds of like-minded farm and ranch guys from around the state, it's pretty obvious that that's what we want. Let us do our thing and let us be successful at it.
In 1962, Hank Wilson, he initiated a media blitz against the wheat referendum. This was a pretty maverick move. Remember, just a couple years before, over 90% of farmers said that they were in favor of the wheat referendum. And here the Farm Bureau is stepping out boldly, initiating what Hank called the Freedom for Agriculture Day, traveling across the state, town to town, community to community, saying that their members wanted to vote against the wheat referendum. They were proving that they were willing to take responsibility for the freedom they demanded. So not only did they go town to town holding these events to rally opposition against the wheat referendum, they took out radio advertisements and newspaper advertisements. They even took out these dueling newspaper advertisements in local and state newspapers. On one side, other farm organizations had advertisements with the headline that said, "Don't gamble with disaster." And basically the copy of the advertisement said, hey, take the secure and stable price. The government is promising you this price for your wheat no matter what. Just take it and be grateful. And on the other side, Farm Bureau's headline was, "Let freedom ring. Farmers do have a choice." And they were encouraging farmers to say, if you don't like this system of being told what your prices are and being told what and how much you can grow, you do have a choice. You can vote no on the wheat referendum, and you can push for an open free market system in which you can be rewarded for your efforts.
We have a choice, and there's a responsibility that goes along with that freedom to protect it, to ensure that future generations has that freedom as well. But there's I guess you could look at freedom requires some sacrifice, some service, especially when you think about the love of God, the love of neighbor, and the love of our country. To serve all three of those, and preferably in that order, God, neighbor, and our country, there's a degree of service. And you can't think of service as a chain. I guess there's a beauty in serving or sacrifice. Farm Bureau as an organization is an organization of individuals. When individual persons are free and work together for the love of God, love of neighbor, and love of country, we do things together. That organization that can help ourselves when we work together, help educate each other on maybe areas that we aren't as familiar with, that other areas of the country, other areas of your community might be struggling with. And to help them, we need to have a better understanding of each other's problems. And Farm Bureau as an organization can bring in speakers, can provide educational materials to help these individuals as they work as a community in union with each other.
On August 30th, 1962, Montana was the only state in the nation that did not approve the wheat referendum with the required 2/3 majority. Now, nationwide, the wheat referendum did pass, but it was on a narrow margin. Only 68.4% of voting farmers consented, and that was just barely above the necessary 66.7% in order to pass by a 2/3 vote. Now, Hank Wilson, as you can imagine, was overjoyed. He was quoted that year as saying, "The eyes of the nation are upon Montana. We can, and I am sure that we will, establish leadership for rejecting many of the federal programs that are being proposed to us, and also provide the leadership for many more of the state farm bureaus to follow in our footsteps in rejecting further government intervention." Hot off the local victory of the wheat referendum, you can imagine Farm Bureau members were on fire. They saw that they could affect change in these huge systems. And in 1962, Farm Bureau Membership Week sent members door to door, farm to farm across the state to discuss Farm Bureau's stance on agricultural issues, to invite feedback, and to ask their neighbors to join. They knew that with some momentum, they could bring more people into the fold and really make change that would impact their lives. And by the time the 1963 wheat referendum was back in the farmers' polling booths, the rest of the nation's farmers joined Montana in saying, "No more." More than 50% of the 1.2 million farmers who voted in that wheat referendum voiced their condemnation of this supply management system. They proved that the majority of farmers were, in fact, finally bold enough to see what they wanted and go for it. At the State Farm Bureau Convention in 1963, Hank Wilson told his fellow Farm Bureau attendees that based on what he saw, based on the proposed policies that they were bringing to that convention, it was clear that they were of the same mind, that they were working towards the same goals, that they had a unified voice, and that they were all working to preserve the individual freedom of choice with a desire towards a free market system for Montana agriculture, free from interference and mandatory price controls. But Hank finished that speech at State Convention with just a touch of resignation. He told his fellow Farm Bureau members that they could be assured that it was likely the administration wasn't going to be discouraged by the farmers' vote against their wheat referendum, and that they would likely try a new approach to supply management. And as predicted, Congress developed a new farm bill in 1964 that included similar controls to those that wheat farmers explicitly voted against in the 1963 referendum. And to make matters worse, they took away the option of a wheat referendum for the farmers to vote yes or no on that program. Now, it would have been easy for the farmers to feel defeated. Instead, Wilson urged them to even greater resolve. And this quote of his from a later convention was really inspiring to me. And what Hank said was, "Whether we value living in a free America enough to face the hard tasks of keeping it free is a problem that each one of us must resolve." He said, "We can't find the answer from our neighbor. It isn't a decision for the county commissioners. We can't get the solution from the governor nor Congress, not the President of the United States. It's up to us."
You know, I guess those Farm Bureau beliefs, the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, are something so important to me, and I fear that our future generations might not completely understand what freedom is. There's some rules that go along with freedom. I mean, it's not a freedom to do whatever we wish. It's more of a freedom of what we ought to do. I think freedom and where it comes from needs to be continually taught to future generations. I guess as the preamble to the Constitution says, for our posterity, that's our future generations. We need to pass this on.